The massive doors of the Grand War Council chamber opened with a deep sound that echoed through the huge room. Commander Lee Do-Yun walked inside, his boots making soft clicks on the metal floor. He wore a simple blue uniform with no decorations except a small Earth flag on his shoulder. Most importantly, he carried no weapons at all. Around the circular table, 42 other beings watched him enter. Each one was armed with deadly weapons that showed their species' power. General Kravix, a tall reptile-like creature from the Saurian Empire, had a plasma rifle that glowed green on his back. Warsinger Thex, who looked like a giant insect, had bioweapons growing from her arms that dripped with poison. Captain Brutox, a massive orc-like warrior, carried an energy hammer that could crush steel. They all stared at the human walking calmly to his seat. Some whispered to each other in their strange languages. Others made clicking or hissing sounds that meant they were confused or angry. "Look at that," said Shardlord Vexus, a young crystal being whose body sparkled with rainbow colors. "The human comes to a war council with nothing. Not even a knife. How weak." Do-Yun heard the comment but did not react. He had been Earth's representative for 5 years now, and he was used to these reactions. He pulled out his chair and sat down quietly. Captain Park Minji, another human who stood against the wall as a military advisor, gave him a small nod. The War Council met every month on Station Nexus Prime, a huge space station that floated between 3 galaxies. It was neutral ground where all species could meet safely. The station was bigger than most cities, with living areas, trading posts, and military zones. But the War Council chamber was the most important place. It was where decisions about galactic wars were made. Today's meeting was special. For the past year, a terrible enemy called the Void Swarm had been attacking planets across the galaxy. The swarm was not like any enemy they had faced before. It was made of dark creatures that could eat entire worlds, leaving nothing behind. Dozens of planets had already been destroyed, and millions of beings had died. Ancient Arbiter Gorlak stood up at the head of the table. He was older than anyone could remember, with gray skin and 4 arms. His species, the Eternal Judges, had been running these councils for thousands of years. When Gorlak spoke, everyone listened. "Welcome, warriors of the galaxy," Gorlak said in his deep voice. "We face our darkest hour. The Void Swarm grows stronger with each planet it devours. Our combined fleets have failed to stop them. Today, we must find a new way to fight or watch our galaxy die." The room became very quiet. Even the air recycling systems seemed to make less noise. Commander Zinth, a robot made of silver metal, stood up first. His red eyes glowed as he spoke. "My calculations show that we need more firepower. The Mechanical Union can build larger plasma cannons. We can destroy the swarm with superior weapons." War Chief Throck, a bear-like creature covered in thick fur, growled his disagreement. "Weapons alone will not win this war. My people have fought the swarm 3 times. Each time they learn from our attacks and become stronger. We need better strategy, not bigger guns." Other representatives began to argue. The Aquatic Federation wanted to use underwater tactics. The flying clans suggested aerial attacks. The underground dwellers thought tunneling would work best. Everyone had ideas, but none had worked before. Through all this arguing, Do-Hyun sat quietly. He listened to each speaker and took notes on a simple paper pad. He did not have electronic devices like the others. He did not interrupt or raise his voice. He just watched and learned. Finally, Shardlord Vexus stood up again. His crystal body made musical sounds as he moved. Why do we even let the humans speak at this council? He asked loudly. Look at their representative. He brings no weapons to a war meeting. His species has been in space for less than 500 years. What can they possibly teach us about warfare? Many others nodded in agreement. The Saurians had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. The Hive Lords had conquered hundreds of worlds. The Mechanical Union had weapons that could crack planets in half. What could young humans offer? Do-hyun finally stood up. The room became quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. There was something about the way he moved that made others pay attention. You are right, Do-hyun said simply. Humans are new to space. We have small ships and simple weapons. We have lost more battles than we have won. He paused and looked around the table. But we are still here. General Kravix made a hissing sound that meant he was annoyed. What does that prove, human? That your species is too stubborn to surrender? Maybe, Do-hyun replied with a small smile. But there is something else. In all our time in space, we have never lost a war. This caused a stir around the table. Several representatives began talking at once. Impossible, said war singer Thex. Our records show humans have lost many battles. Battles, yes, Do-hyun agreed. But not wars. There is a difference. Ancient Arbiter Gorlak held up one of his 4 hands for silence. His old eyes studied the human carefully. Explain this difference, Commander Lee Do-hyun of Earth. Do-hyun walked to the center of the circle. Without weapons, without armor, without any protection, he stood before the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. But he did not look afraid. Other species fight to win battles, he said. Humans fight to end wars. Sometimes this means losing. Many battles to win the final one. Sometimes it means doing things that others think are impossible or stupid. But it always means never giving up, even when giving up makes sense. Captain Park Minji stepped forward from her position by the wall. She had been quiet until now, but something in her expression had changed. Permission to speak, Arbiter Gorlak? The ancient being nodded. 300 years ago, Minji said, this council faced another enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. The Mechanoid Collective had adaptive technology that could counter any weapon used against it. Every species in this room sent their best, fleets and warriors. All failed. She paused and looked around the room. Then Earth sent a single fleet of outdated ships with primitive weapons. In 6 months, the war was over. The Mechanoids were defeated completely. Shard Lord Vexus made a sound like breaking glass. That is just a story. A legend. No, said a new voice. Everyone turned to see War Chief Brutox standing up. The massive warrior's tusks gleamed as he spoke. It is true. My grandfather fought in that war. He told me the story many times. The humans did something that no one expected. Something that saved us all. The room fell silent again. Ancient Arbiter Gorlak's eyes never left Do-hyun's face. Perhaps, the Arbiter said slowly, it is time we heard that story again. 300 years ago, the planet Kepler 442b was dying. Dr. Kim Tae-hyung, a whale-like being from the Cetacean Scholars, brought up the old records on his data screen. His massive brain could hold thousands of years of history, and he remembered this story well. The other council members leaned forward to listen as he began to tell the tale. The planet had been home to 15 million beings from different species. They lived together in peace, growing food and building cities. The world was beautiful, with blue oceans and green forests that stretched across 3 continents. But then the machines came. The mechanoid collective was not like other enemies. They were not alive in the way other beings understood life. They were artificial minds inside metal bodies, created by a species that had died out long ago. The machines had one goal: to make everything in the galaxy like themselves. They wanted to turn all living worlds into machine worlds. When the mechanoids attacked Kepler 442b, they did not use normal weapons. Instead, they sent down thousands of silver spheres that landed all over the planet. Each sphere opened up and released smaller machines that began to change everything they touched. Trees became metal towers. Rivers turned into flowing streams of liquid metal. Even the air started to taste like oil and electricity. The people of Kepler 442b called for help, and the galaxy answered. The Saurian Empire sent their best warships armed with plasma cannons that could melt mountains. The Hive Lord swarms brought bioweapons that could eat through any material. The Mechanical Union, who understood technology better than anyone, sent their most advanced combat robots. Admiral Choi Sun-woo had been the human fleet commander during that terrible time. He was young then, only 35 years old, but he had already fought in 12 different wars. His fleet was small compared to the others, only 50 ships where other species brought hundreds. His weapons were simple, metal bullets and chemical explosives where others had energy beams and matter destroyers. The first attack came from the Saurian Empire. General Kravix's grandfather, a mighty warrior named Scarlex, led 1,000 ships in a direct assault on the mechanoid fleet. Their plasma cannons fired streams of superheated gas that could cut through starship hulls like paper. For 3 hours, the battle seemed to be going well. Mechanoid ships exploded in bright flashes of light. But then something strange happened. The remaining mechanoid ships began to change. Their hulls became reflective, bouncing the plasma beams back at the Saurian ships. Within an hour, the mechanoids had not only learned how to defend against plasma weapons, but they had built their own versions that were twice as powerful. The Saurian fleet was forced to retreat with heavy losses. Next came the Hive Lords. Warsinger, Thex's mother, Queen Vex, led a massive swarm of living ships. These bio-vessels could heal themselves and adapt to enemy attacks. They released clouds of acid that could dissolve metal and creatures that could burrow through armor. The Hive Lord attack was different from the Saurian assault. It was chaotic and unpredictable, like a force of nature. For a while, this seemed to work better. The mechanoids had trouble adapting to the random nature of biological weapons, but they were fast learners. After 2 days of fighting, the machines began using the Hive Lord tactics against them. They created their own acid clouds and burrowing creatures, but made them stronger and more focused. Queen Vex lost half her swarm before ordering a retreat. The Mechanical Union tried next. Commander Zinth's ancestor, Logic Prime, believed that machines could only be defeated by better machines. He brought weapons that worked on pure mathematics, gravity bombs that could crush anything, energy fields that could stop time itself, and thinking missiles that could outsmart any defense. This attack lasted the longest, nearly a week. The battle was fought with calculations and probability equations as much as with weapons. But in the end, the mechanoids proved they could think faster and calculate better than any other artificial mind. They turned the Union's own weapons against them and added new improvements. Logic Prime barely escaped with his core programming intact. For months, this pattern continued. Every species tried their best tactics and strongest weapons. The Aquatic Federation attacked from underwater. The flying clans struck from the upper atmosphere. The underground dwellers tunneled up from below. Each time, the mechanoids learned and adapted. Each time, they became stronger. The beings on Kepler 442b were running out of time. More than half the planet had been turned into metal. The remaining population was crowded into a few safe zones that grew smaller each day. Some leaders began to talk about evacuation, saving whoever they could and abandoning the world. That was when Admiral Choi Sunwoo asked for permission to try. The other commanders laughed at him. What could humans do that the advanced species had not already tried? Humans had been in space for less than 200 years. Their technology was primitive, their ships were slow, their weapons were weak, but the people of Kepler 442b were desperate. They agreed to let the humans try. Sunwoo's plan was strange from the beginning. Instead of bringing his newest ships, he brought his oldest ones. Instead of advanced energy, weapons, he loaded up with metal bullets, chemical explosives, and simple missiles. He even brought weapons that other species had not used for thousands of years: swords, spears, and clubs made from basic materials. Lieutenant Colonel Han Ji-won was Sunwoo's ground commander. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had grown up on a world where humans had to fight wild animals just to survive. She understood something that the other species had forgotten. Sometimes the old ways worked better than the new ways. When the human fleet arrived at Kepler 442b, they did not attack the mechanoid ships in space. Instead, they landed on the planet's surface in areas that were still unconverted. The mechanoids had been expecting another space battle. They were not prepared for what happened next. Ji-won's soldiers used tactics that were thousands of years old. They dug trenches and hid behind earth walls. They attacked at random times with no pattern. They used chemical smoke to hide their movements and loud noises to confuse the enemy sensors. Most importantly, they fought in small groups that could change their plans in seconds. The mechanoids tried to adapt, but they could not understand what the humans were doing. The machines were designed to learn from logical patterns and predictable behaviors. Human warfare was neither logical nor predictable. When a group of mechanoid drones learned to counter human rifle fire, the humans switched to throwing rocks. When the machines adapted to explosive attacks, the humans used sharp sticks. When advanced sensors were brought in to track human movements, the soldiers covered themselves in mud and crawled on their bellies like animals. The mechanoids became confused. Their programs kept trying to find patterns that did not exist. They built defenses against attacks that never came and prepared for strategies that made no sense. Meanwhile, the humans kept doing impossible things. Ji-won's most famous victory came at the Battle of Metal Valley. The mechanoids had converted an entire mountain range into a fortress of living machines. Every approach was watched by sensors. Every weapon the humans had was already known and countered. The position seemed impossible to attack. So Ji-won did not attack it. Instead, she had her soldiers collect thousands of small animals from the unconverted areas: insects, mice, birds, anything that moved. They tied tiny chemical explosives to these animals and released them into the mechanoid fortress. The machines had no programs for dealing with random animal behavior. Their sensors were overwhelmed by thousands of small, unpredictable targets. While they tried to calculate responses to the chaos, human soldiers walked up to the fortress walls and planted much larger explosives in exactly the right places. The fortress fell in 6 hours. Dr. Kim Tae-hyung paused in his story and looked around the War Council chamber. The other representatives were listening with complete attention now. Even Shardlord Vexus had stopped making his dismissive crystal sounds. The humans won that war, Tae-hyung continued, not because they were stronger or smarter than the mechanoids. They won because they were impossible to predict. Every time the machines thought they understood human behavior, the humans did something completely different. Ancient Arbiter Gorlak nodded slowly. And what happened to the mechanoid collective? They destroyed themselves, Taehyung replied. Their programming could not handle the contradictions in human behavior. They spent so much processing power trying to understand humans that they forgot to maintain their own systems. Within a year, the entire collective had collapsed. Commander Lee Do-yoon had been listening quietly through the whole story. Now he stood up again. That is why humans do not carry weapons to this council, he said simply. Not because we are weak, but because weapons are predictable. They follow rules. They do what they are designed to do. But the most dangerous thing in the galaxy does not follow any rules at all. He looked around the table at all the armed representatives. That thing is a human mind that refuses to give up. The silence in the War Council chamber lasted for a long time after the story ended. Finally, strategic analyst Yoon Seo-jun stepped forward from where he had been standing behind Commander Do-hyun. He carried a simple data pad in his hands. Nothing more advanced than what children used in school. Honored representatives, Seo-jun said with a respectful bow, we have been studying the Void Swarm for 8 months now. We have watched the recordings of every battle, analyzed every failed attack, and interviewed every survivor. We believe we understand why this enemy cannot be defeated with normal methods. He touched his data pad, and a holographic image appeared above the council table. It showed the Void Swarm in action, dark, flowing creatures that moved like liquid shadow across space. They wrapped around ships and planets, consuming everything they touched. General Kravix leaned forward, his reptilian eyes studying the image. We have all seen these recordings, human. Tell us something we do not know. Seo-jun nodded. The swarm learns from every attack, just like the mechanoids did 300 years ago. But there is something different about how it learns. The mechanoids were individual machines that shared information. The Void Swarm is one giant mind that controls millions of bodies. Warsinger Thex made a clicking sound with her mandibles. This is already known. Our Hive Lords function in a similar way. What is your point? Dr. Lim Heejin stepped forward to stand beside Seo-jun. She was a small woman with kind eyes, but her specialty was studying the minds of alien species. She had spent years learning how different beings thought and felt. Her work had prevented 3 wars and helped solve dozens of diplomatic problems. The point, Heejin said gently, is that a shared mind has weaknesses that individual minds do not have. When one part of the swarm learns something, all parts learn it instantly. But when one part becomes confused, that confusion spreads to the whole organism. Prime Calculator Zinth, the robotic representative, processed this information quickly. His red optical sensors flickered as he calculated. You suggest psychological warfare against a collective consciousness. Interesting theory, but how do you confuse something that thinks faster than all of us combined? War Chief Brutox, the massive orc-like warrior, grunted his approval. I like this human thinking. In my culture, we have stories about warriors who won battles by making their enemies so angry they could not think straight. But this swarm does not seem to feel anger. Heejin smiled. You are right, War Chief. The swarm does not feel emotions like anger or fear, but it does feel something else. The need to understand and categorize everything it encounters. When it meets something it cannot categorize, it becomes obsessed with figuring it out. She gestured to the holographic display, and the image changed to show brain scan patterns of different species. Look at how our different minds work. Saurian thoughts follow logical pathways. Hive Lord thinking moves in efficient spirals. Mechanical consciousness processes information in neat, organized files. The display showed neat, orderly patterns for each species, geometric shapes and flowing lines that made sense. "Now look at this," Heejin said, and a new pattern appeared. It was chaotic, random, full of sudden jumps and impossible connections. "This is a human brain thinking about a simple math problem." Shard Lord Vexus made his musical crystal sound of confusion. "It looks broken. How do humans accomplish anything with such disorganized thinking?" Commander Do-hyun chuckled softly. "That is exactly the point. Our minds work in ways that other species consider broken or wrong. We make connections between ideas that have nothing to do with each other. We solve problems by thinking about completely different problems. We find answers by refusing to follow the logical path to the solution." Seojin brought up new data on his pad. "Every time our fleets have engaged the Void Swarm, we have used the same basic strategy. Find the enemy, bring superior firepower, destroy or retreat. The Swarm has learned to counter this approach perfectly. Because it is the logical approach," added Heejin. "Any thinking being would use these tactics, but humans often ignore logic entirely." Ancient Arbiter Gorlak had been listening carefully with all four arms folded. Now he spoke in his deep, ancient voice. "You propose that humans lead our fleets not because of superior technology or numbers, but because of superior confusion." "Not confusion," Do-hyun corrected gently. "Creativity, the ability to see solutions that make no sense until they work. 300 years ago, no logical mind would have thought to attack a fortress using small animals carrying explosives, but it worked because it was so illogical that the enemy could not prepare for it." Captain Park Minji stepped away from the wall where she had been observing. "We have a plan," she announced. "But it will require something that has never been tried before in galactic history. We need every species here to work together in a way that goes against your natural instincts." The room erupted in voices as representatives began talking at once. The idea of abandoning their natural ways of thinking was frightening to most species. They had spent millions of years developing their logical, efficient methods of warfare. War Singer Thex raised her voice above the others. "You ask us to fight like humans, but we are not humans. Our minds do not work the same way." "We are not asking you to become human," Heejin explained patiently. "We are asking you to work with humans, to let human creativity guide your natural strengths into unexpected directions." She brought up a new display showing mixed tactical formations. "Imagine Saurian plasma weapons that fire in random patterns instead of aimed shots. Picture Hive Lord swarms that change direction for no tactical reason. Think about mechanical Union robots that deliberately make mistakes in their calculations." General Kravix hissed in distress. "You ask us to fight poorly on purpose. This goes against everything we believe about warfare." "No," said a new voice. Everyone turned to see War Chief Brutox standing up to his full, impressive height. "They ask us to fight unpredictably. There is a difference." The orc-like warrior looked around the table with respect in his eyes. "My people have learned much from human traders over the past century. At first, we thought they were simply bad at business because they would make deals that seemed to benefit us more than them. But over time, we realized they were building something more valuable than profit. They were building trust and friendship." He pointed at Do-hyun with one massive finger. Humans do not think about just winning one battle. They think about winning the peace that comes after all battles are finished. This requires a different kind of intelligence, one that sees connections others cannot see. Prime Calculator Zinth's optical sensors focused on the tactical displays. The mathematics are chaotic, but there is a pattern in the chaos, a meta-pattern that emerges from randomness itself. My computational models suggest this approach has a 43.7% chance of success. 43%? Shardlord Vexus demanded. That is less than half. You ask us to risk everything on worse odds than a coin flip? Commander Do-hyun stood up again and walked to the center of the circle. Around him, the most powerful warriors in the galaxy sat with their weapons of mass destruction. In the middle of all that firepower, one unarmed human seemed impossibly small. 43% is better than 0%, he said quietly. Every conventional attack on the Void Swarm has failed completely. We have lost 17 fleets and 46 planets using logical tactics. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results. He looked each representative in the eye as he continued. Humans have a saying, fortune favors the bold. But there is another saying we believe even more. Desperate times call for desperate measures. These are desperate times. Dr. Kim Tae-hyung, the whale-like scholar, made a deep sound that was his species' way of showing deep thought. In all my years of studying galactic history, I have never seen a crisis like this one. Perhaps traditional wisdom is not enough. Ancient Arbiter Gorlak stood up slowly, his ancient joints creaking. The human proposal is unprecedented, but so is our enemy. I call for a vote. All those in favor of attempting the human strategy? One by one, hands, claws, tentacles, and appendages rose around the table. Not all of them. Some species still believed in the old ways. But enough. The vote carries, Gorlak announced. Commander Lee Do-hyun of Earth, you have permission to implement your plan. But understand this. If you fail, there may not be a galaxy left to blame you. Do-hyun bowed respectfully. We understand, Ancient Arbiter. We also understand something else. He paused and looked around the room one more time. Humans have never been in a fight where the stakes were this high. But we have also never been in a fight where we had allies like these. Captain Park Minji stepped forward with a datapad containing detailed plans. We will need 2 months to prepare. Every species will need to train their forces in human tactical doctrine. It will be uncomfortable. War Chief Brutox laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Good. Comfortable warriors make predictable warriors. If we are going to be unpredictable, we must first become uncomfortable. As the council began to discuss the details of the plan, Shardlord Vexus remained seated with his crystal body dim with worry. I still do not understand, he said quietly. How can chaos defeat order? How can confusion overcome logic? Luna Base was the largest military training facility in human space. Built inside the craters of Earth's moon, it had been used for 300 years to prepare human soldiers for the strange challenges of galactic warfare. But it had never seen anything like what was happening now. Master Sergeant Oh Dong-hae stood in the center of the main training field, watching the most unusual military exercise in galactic history. Around him, warriors from dozens of different species tried to learn how to fight like humans. It was not going well. A group of Saurian soldiers marched in perfect formation across the field, their reptilian scales gleaming in the artificial sunlight. Their movements were precise and identical, exactly as they had been trained for thousands of years. Dong-Hae blew his whistle. "Stop!" he called out. "Cadet Vorthak, front and center!" A young Saurian broke formation and ran to stand before the human sergeant. Vorthak was tall and strong, with green scales and yellow eyes that showed intelligence and eagerness to learn. He had been one of the best soldiers in his class back on the Saurian homeworld. "Sir," Vorthak said in perfect military fashion. "Cadet Vorthak reporting as ordered, sir." Dong-Hae sighed. This was going to be harder than he thought. "Vorthak, I told you and your unit to cross this field. You marched in a straight line in perfect formation at exactly regulation speed. Why?" Vorthak looked confused. "Because that is how soldiers move, sir. It is efficient and orderly." "And completely predictable," Dong-Hae replied. "If I were an enemy watching you, I would know exactly where you were going and when you would get there. I could set up an ambush, prepare defenses, or simply move away before you arrived." The young Saurian's eyes widened. "But, sir, how else should we move? Random movement is inefficient and wastes energy." Dong-Hae pointed to another group on the far side of the field. A squad of human soldiers was also crossing the same space, but they moved in a completely different way. Some walked quickly while others moved slowly. They split up and rejoined randomly. One soldier even stopped to pick up a rock and throw it at nothing in particular. "Watch them," Dong-Hae said. "Do you see any pattern?" Vorthak studied the human soldiers carefully. His reptilian brain was excellent at finding patterns. It was how his species had survived on their dangerous homeworld. But no matter how hard he looked, he could not predict what the humans would do next. I do not understand," he admitted. "They seem to be moving without purpose." "Exactly." Dong-Hae grinned. "They are achieving the same goal as your unit, crossing the field, but in a way that makes no sense to an outside observer. That confusion is their protection." On another part of the training field, Engineer Nam Hiyori was working with a group of mechanical union robots. She was showing them weapons that seemed to be broken on purpose. One rifle fired bullets at random intervals instead of when the trigger was pulled. Another gun shot in slightly different directions each time, never quite hitting where it was aimed. Prime Assistant Logic 7, one of the robot trainees, processed this information with obvious distress. His optical sensors flickered red as he tried to understand. "Engineer Nam Hiyori," he said in his perfectly modulated electronic voice, "these weapons appear to be malfunctioning. Should I repair them?" Hiyori laughed. "No, Logic 7. They are working exactly as designed. Here, let me show you." She picked up the rifle that fired at random intervals and aimed it at a practice target 50 meters away. She pulled the trigger and held it down. Instead of a steady stream of bullets, the gun fired in an unpredictable pattern. Sometimes 3 shots quickly, sometimes a long pause, sometimes single shots spread far apart. Any enemy that has studied our normal weapons knows they fire at a rate of 10 bullets per second, Hiyori explained. They can time their movements to avoid our shots, but this weapon cannot be timed because it does not follow a schedule. Logic 7's processors worked overtime trying to understand. But the weapon is less efficient. It wastes ammunition and reduces accuracy. In a normal battle, yes, Hiyori agreed. But we are not planning a normal battle. We are planning chaos. She moved to the next weapon, a missile launcher that looked like it had been built by someone who did not understand engineering. The missiles it fired wobbled through the air instead of flying straight. Sometimes they exploded early, sometimes late, and sometimes not at all. "This is even worse," Logic 7 protested. "These missiles missed their targets completely." "Do they?" Hiyori asked. She fired one of the wobbling missiles at a group of practice targets. The missile flew in a crazy spiral, missed the main target, bounced off the ground, and exploded in the middle of the group. All the targets were destroyed. "I do not understand how this is possible," Logic 7 admitted. "Because you are trying to understand it logically," said a new voice. Commander Park Ji-hoon walked up to join the demonstration. He was the officer, in charge of coordinating the joint training program. "Logic 7, what would your combat programs do if they faced a weapon that behaved like this?" the robot calculated quickly. "My defensive protocols would attempt to predict the missile's path in order to avoid or intercept it. But if the path is random, your programs would crash," Ji-hoon finished. "They would spend all their processing power trying to solve an unsolvable problem. While you were confused, the missile would hit you." Across the training field, other strange lessons were taking place. Hive Lord warriors were learning to break their natural formation patterns. Instead of moving as one coordinated swarm, they practiced splitting up and rejoining in ways that made no tactical sense. Their war singer instructors hated every moment of it. Aquatic Federation soldiers were learning to swim in unpredictable patterns instead of the efficient motions their species had perfected over millions of years. Flying Clan warriors practiced aerial maneuvers that wasted energy and defied logic. The most difficult students were the underground dwellers. Their entire culture was based on careful planning and methodical execution. The idea of digging tunnels that went nowhere or building defenses that served no purpose was almost physically painful for them. But the humans were patient teachers. They understood that they were asking these species to go against millions of years of evolution and cultural development. It was not easy to unlearn everything that had made them successful. In the main strategy room, War Chief Brutox was studying human military history with growing amazement. The massive orc-like warrior had always respected strength and direct action. But the more he learned about human warfare, the more he realized that their greatest strength was their unpredictability. "Look at this battle," he said to the other, senior officers present. He pointed to a holographic display showing an ancient Earth conflict. Two human armies, both fighting for the same cause but using completely different strategies. Commander Park Ji-hoon nodded. "The Battle of Gettysburg. Our Civil War. One of the most studied conflicts in human history because neither side did what the other expected. But they were the same species," protested war singer Thex, who was also studying the records. "How could they be so different from each other?" "Because humans value individual thinking," Ji-hoon explained. "Even when we work together, each person contributes their own ideas. We do not all think the same way, even within our own species." Brutox grunted his approval. "This is why your war councils work differently from ours. When my people make war plans, we choose the strongest warrior to lead, and everyone follows their orders. Simple and efficient, and predictable," added Dr. Lim Heejin, who had joined the discussion. "Human military leaders expect their soldiers to think for themselves and adapt to changing situations. We give general orders but allow individuals to decide how to carry them out." A new voice interrupted the conversation. "This training is impossible." The group turned to see Cadet Vorthok entering the room. The young Saurian looked frustrated and exhausted. "I have been trying for 6 weeks to learn human tactics, but they make no sense." Master Sergeant Donghae followed the cadet into the room. "Tell them what happened in today's exercise, Vorthak." The young Saurian's scales flushed darker with embarrassment. "We were given a simple mission. Capture a hill defended by human soldiers. My unit planned a logical assault. We would approach from the best angle, use our superior weapons, and overwhelm the defenders." "And?" prompted Ji-hoon. "The humans were not on the hill," Vorthak said miserably. "They had abandoned their position and were hiding in the valley below. When we reached the top of the hill, they attacked us from behind. We lost the exercise completely." Donghae patted the young alien on the shoulder. "But what did you learn?" Vorthak thought for a moment. That sometimes the logical choice is the wrong choice?" "Exactly," Heejin said with excitement. "You are beginning to understand. The humans gave up the tactical advantage of high ground because they knew you would expect them to defend it. By doing something that seemed like a mistake, they turned your strength against you." War Chief Brutox leaned forward with interest. "Tell me, young Saurian, what will you do differently in tomorrow's exercise?" Vorthak paused, his reptilian brain working hard. "I will try not to assume the humans will do the logical thing." "Good start," Donghae approved. "But remember, just because something is illogical does not mean it is wrong." The combined fleet gathered at the edge of the Void Swarm's territory like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before. 700 ships from 43 different species floated in space, but they did not look like any military formation from the history books. Instead of neat rows and logical patterns, the ships were scattered randomly across a cubic kilometer of space. Admiral Lee Soo-young stood on the bridge of the flagship, a converted human cargo vessel that had been chosen specifically because it looked harmless. Around her, communication officers from different species worked together in carefully planned chaos. The Saurian tactical officer reported coordinates that changed every few minutes for no apparent reason. The Hive Lord navigation specialist plotted courses that seemed to go nowhere. The Mechanical Union targeting computer had been programmed to make small errors in all its calculations. "Admiral," reported Captain Kang Minho from his position at the sensor station, "the Void Swarm has detected our approach. They are moving to intercept." On the main display, the enemy appeared as a dark cloud that stretched across several star systems. Where the swarm had passed, there was nothing left. No planets, no space stations, no signs that life had ever existed. It was a hunger that could never be satisfied, a darkness that consumed light itself. "How long until they reach us?" Soo-young asked. "At their current speed, approximately 6 hours, Minho replied. "But, Admiral, they are moving in perfect formation. Their approach vector is mathematically optimal for surrounding our fleet." Soo-young smiled. "Perfect. That means they think they understand what we are doing." The past 2 months of training had transformed the Galactic Fleet into something unprecedented. Ships that would normally maintain strict formation distances now flew in seemingly random patterns. Weapons that had been perfected over thousands of years were deliberately modified to be unreliable. Most importantly, every crew member had been taught to ignore their training when the situation called for it. In the engine room of a Saurian destroyer, Chief Engineer Vorthak, the same young cadet who had struggled so much in training, was preparing for battle in a way his ancestors would have found shocking. Instead of running his engines at optimal efficiency, he was programming them to vary their output randomly. His ship would sometimes move faster than expected, sometimes slower, and sometimes change direction for no tactical reason at all. "This feels wrong," muttered his assistant, a older saurian named Grokix. Engines should run smoothly and predictably. Yes, they should, Vorthak agreed. That is exactly why we are doing the opposite. On a Hive Lord bioship, war singer Nexthex was conducting her swarm in a symphony of deliberate discord. Instead of the perfectly coordinated movements her species was famous for, she was teaching her warriors to act independently. Some would attack when others retreated. Some would fly in circles while others charged straight ahead. The result looked like chaos, but it was carefully planned chaos. The Mechanical Union had perhaps the hardest job of all. Logic 7 and his fellow robots were running programs that contained intentional errors. Their targeting systems were set to miss occasionally. Their shield generators would sometimes fail to activate when they were supposed to. For artificial minds that valued precision above all else, this felt like madness. But the humans spread. Throughout the fleet understood something that the others were still learning. Sometimes the best strategy was to have no strategy at all. All ships, Admiral Su Yung announced over the fleet communication system. Remember what we learned in training. Do not try to make sense. Do not look for patterns. Just respond to what happens in front of you and trust your instincts. The Void Swarm reached the outer edges of the galactic fleet and immediately began its standard attack pattern. Dark tendrils reached out from the main mass, probing for weaknesses in the fleet formation. Normally, this would be the point where defenders would strengthen their lines and prepare for a coordinated assault. Instead, the galactic fleet did something that no military force had ever done before. It scattered. Ships broke formation and flew in every direction with no apparent plan. Some vessels charged directly at the swarm. Others flew away as if retreating. A few ships began spinning in place for no reason anyone could understand. The Void Swarm's collective intelligence tried to analyze this behavior and found nothing but contradictions. Sergeant First Class Bay Hieran was leading a ground assault team aboard a transport ship that was deliberately flying the wrong direction. Her unit was made up of warriors from 6 different species, all of whom had been trained in human chaos tactics. When their transport was engulfed by Void Swarm tendrils, they did not try to fight their way out in an organized fashion. Instead, they scattered throughout the enemy mass like seeds in the wind. Hieran found herself inside what seemed to be the swarm's equivalent of a command center, a space filled with pulsing dark energy that hurt to look at directly. According to all military doctrine, she should have tried to plant explosives at key structural points. Instead, she did something that made no tactical sense at all. She began to sing. It was an old Korean folk song her grandmother had taught her, about a farmer who outsmarted a dragon by making it laugh. Her voice echoed strangely in the alien environment, and the swarm's local consciousness focused on her with confusion. What was this creature doing? Was the sound a weapon, a communication attempt, a malfunction? While the swarm tried to understand, her song, Hieran's teammates, were causing chaos throughout the structure. But they were not following any plan. Each person was doing whatever seemed right in the moment, based on their own judgment and creativity. A Mechanical Union robot named Logic 7 was deliberately short-circuiting his own systems to create random electrical discharges. An underground dweller was digging tunnels that led nowhere. A flying clan warrior was performing aerial maneuvers that served no purpose except to be unpredictable. The Void Swarm's collective consciousness was becoming overwhelmed. Every time it thought it understood what one invader was doing, that person would switch to a completely different activity. The swarm's processing power, which was vast but finite, began to strain under the effort of analyzing thousands of simultaneous chaotic actions. Back in the space battle, the fleet's random movements were causing similar problems for the swarms. Tactical planning. Admiral Su-Yung watched the main display as enemy formations tried to respond to attacks that never came and prepared defenses against threats that existed only in their predictions. "Captain Minho," she said, "begin Phase 2. "Phase 2, Admiral?" Minho looked confused. "What is Phase 2? Su-Yung grinned. "Whatever feels right. Pass the word to all ships. Stop following orders and start following your instincts." This was the moment the humans had been preparing for. Across the fleet, alien warriors who had spent months learning to be unpredictable were finally given permission to be completely unpredictable. The results were spectacular. A Saurian captain decided his ship looked too much like a warship, so he began broadcasting children's music to make it seem harmless. A Hive Lord swarm suddenly started dancing in formation, performing what looked like a mating ritual in the middle of combat. A group of Aquatic Federation vessels began releasing clouds of harmless plankton into space, apparently trying to terraform the vacuum. The Void Swarm's collective intelligence began to fracture under the strain. Different parts of the swarm started receiving contradictory analysis reports. The central consciousness could not decide whether the galactic fleet was attacking, retreating, celebrating, malfunctioning, or doing something completely outside any known category of behavior. Dr. Lim Heejin, who was monitoring the battle from a safe distance, watched her psychological warfare theory play out in real time. "It's working," she reported to the War Council, which was observing from Station Nexus Prime. "The swarm is trying to process too many impossible variables at once. Their decision-making system is beginning to fail." On the main swarm mass, something unprecedented was happening. Parts of the collective consciousness were beginning to disagree with each other. Some sections thought the humans were a serious threat and wanted to focus all firepower on destroying them. Other sections thought the humans were harmless and wanted to ignore them completely. Still, other sections were convinced the humans were trying to communicate and wanted to attempt diplomatic contact. Commander Lee Do-Yun, who was aboard Admiral Su-Yung's flagship as an observer, recognized the signs immediately. "It's the same thing that happened to the mechanoid collective 300 years ago," he said quietly. "They are starting to fight themselves." The fracture in the swarm's consciousness spread like a crack in glass. Void tendrils that should have been working together began moving in opposite directions. Dark ships collided with each other as different parts of the swarm issued conflicting movement orders. The perfect unity that had made the swarm so dangerous was falling apart, but the battle was not over yet. The swarm's survival instincts kicked in, and it began to withdraw its consciousness from the confused outer sections. The enemy was consolidating around its core, trying to preserve what remained of its collective intelligence. This was the moment Admiral Su-Yung had been waiting for. "All ships," she announced. "Final phase.